You finally decided that you wanted to pick up a new M2 Mac Mini. Problem is, the amount of choices can be quite intimidating. People telling you what you should and shouldn't get because of their personal experience. In this video, I'm going to revisit some of the comments and questions I got over the last few Mac Mini videos, and we can figure this out together. If you found this video by it being suggested, I do all things related to Apple, the good and the bad. If that sounds like your thing, please give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you won't miss my next video. Thank you. The popularity of this year's Mac Mini has reached insane levels. The performance increase that this machine has gotten versus the cost almost seems impossible. When the M1 Mac Mini chip specs were first laid out, we were at a disadvantage because we had no frame of reference to pull info from. What we once knew was CPU choice of being an i3, i5, or i7, or even which generation GPU you're getting. We now have an all-on-one chip with somewhat familiar info like how many cores. I now heard newer terms like neural engine. I see your lips moving, there's sound coming out, but it was all Greek to me. All I wanted to know was, is this gonna be any faster than what we have now? Why did it start at 8 gigs of memory? Barely anyone recommends 8 gigs of memory. Some think 16 is too little. However, this is an all-new platform. Hell, software companies had to scramble to be able to have their stuff work on the new M1 architecture. It's now been a little over 2 years, and we've learned that these chips were so much faster than what we had. But the next level was insane. Apple eventually introduced the M1 Pro, Max, and Ultra, each one getting more powerful than the last. We now have a frame of reference when looking at these new M2 chips. So Apple hits us with a curveball and puts an M2 Pro chip in the Mac Mini. By the way, this does not mean that the Mac Mini is now a Pro machine. That's just a silly title that Apple's given to these chips that just confuses us more. The performance may be better, but it's certainly not Pro by any means. Damn thing should have an SD card reader on it at least. Let's break down the M2 Mac Mini so you can decide what's right for you. Now, Apple has 3 tiers of M2s listed on their website. The first 2 tiers are pretty basic. They both have an M2 chip, 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, and 8 gigs of unified memory. The first one does have 256 gigs of storage and is priced at $599. The second one has 512 gigs of storage and is priced at $799. Now the I/O on these two are exactly the same, a 1 gigabit Ethernet jack, which can be upgraded to a 10 gigabit Ethernet jack for $100 more, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 1 2.0 HDMI port, not 2.1, poo, and 2 USB-A ports, still 2.0, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. Now, the third tier is an entry-level M2 Pro chip, and that has a 10-core CPU with a 16-core GPU, 16 gigs of unified memory, and starts at a 512 gigabyte SSD storage, priced at $1299. Now the I/O on the M2 Pro is a gigabit Ethernet port, can be upgraded to 10 gigabit, 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 1 HDMI 2.1 port, thank you, and 2 USB-A 2.0 ports, who again, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. The M2 Mac Minis with intro memory of 8 gig is still laughable to people who are knowledgeable with computers. I do admit, this is not something that you want to stick with if you plan on pushing this machine at all. Something as simple as a bunch of Chrome tabs open, maybe playing a Mac-approved game, listening to music, or downloading a movie should be okay. I read a really cool comment that somebody had, and I can't quite remember what it is, but it kind of went something like this. When you buy an Apple product, the second it's shipped, it's obsolete. Meaning, they don't want you to be able to do any kind of upgrade after the fact. When the next one is released, and it's better, you'll want to upgrade. So if you're someone who's picking this machine up to have something to do basic tasks, the $599 will do everything that you need for 3, maybe 4 years. Who knows, maybe even a little longer. It will eventually get slower and you may or may not notice. If your needs change and you start using it for more things, well, then you're probably going to want to upgrade to something newer. If you're able to upgrade the memory now, it might give you a couple more years of usage. For example, I've got a 2018 MacBook Pro, 15-inch, 2.6 GHz, 6-core Intel i7. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, Intel HD Graphics 630, and 500 gigs of storage. My wife and I use it every day for things like internet, email, paying bills, watching videos, and I have on occasion used it for editing video with an external drive. I wouldn't recommend anyone going out and buying one of these to save money and expect a great editing experience. But it did let me get a video done that was 40% there already. And 5 years have passed, and I'm just now thinking about upgrading, so I have something a little bit faster to edit with while I'm traveling. Now, I did get a lot of comments on my video about editing on the M2 Mac Mini. Why did you get a machine with only 16 gigs of RAM? I should have gotten more, and anyone who's doing what I do should max it out. And if you don't want to overspend on SSD, get an external drive to save money. Now, others suggested not only get more RAM, get a 1 terabyte storage, but only use it to install programs and run everything else off an external drive. Now, I should have been more clear in that video. I wanted to see what I was able to do with the bare minimum. If I could save people money by showing them what causes this machine to stop working, then I hope it helped. Now, I am going through a lot of information in these videos, and a bunch of people have commented asking for advice. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask. I will answer the best I can and be completely honest with you about what you should get. Now, the other side issue with the minimum storage on the base M2 is how it's set up. Apple used 2 NAND chips in the SSD for the M1. In the M2, they combined it to a single NAND chip in the SSD. This is causing the SSD in the M2 to run slower. Now we see why the price dropped $100. Dear Apple, please don't give us a new product that's slower for a lower price. I'd rather pay the same or a little bit more to actually see an improvement. All the comments and advice I got is still awesome and should be added to the conversation. I also had someone say they don't want to plug in external drives. It's too messy and I would rather get some more internal storage. Listen, I totally understand that, hence why my Mac Studio is the base Ultra with 128 gigs of RAM and 4 terabytes of storage. Yeah, I paid through the nose for that, and I totally accept it. Now, I could have saved $600 and got 2 terabytes of storage and invested in something that would do everything that I need for way less than it cost to upgrade. But I wanted a simple, clean solution and was willing to pay for it. This is what you have to ask yourself. What do you want to do on your machine? Does your budget allow for you to get something that will do what you need without stopping you dead in your tracks? I talked about the basic needs of a user with some options to upgrade for longer use. Now, if you're someone that might dabble in a little bit of editing, whether it's video, photo, and music, the M2 chip is a great start. Now, upgrading the RAM to 16 gigs will increase that base price by $200 to $799. If you still have room in your budget and you would rather increase the internal SSD and not have it be slow, then yes, get the 512 gig for $200. This is going to total up to $999. However, like I've mentioned before, and I have to mention again, pairing an external NVMe enclosure for $125 and the Samsung 970 EVO SSD for $49 just doubles your storage for $175, and it has faster read-write speeds. Plus, it can be upgraded down the road if you need more space. I know this is repetitive, but you could take that $200 extra and spend it on maxing out the RAM to 24 gigs. You can then save to pick up an external SSD setup and really get a long life out of this machine. Now, I want to state this as well. If you're going to start pushing this machine, then you might see a bit of issues with performance, but nothing that's going to stop you from what you need to do. If you edit for more than a hobby and have a larger budget and need a more powerful machine, well, then the next step is the M2 Pro. Now I'm going to start off with that base M2 Pro Mac Mini that I talked about earlier in the video, starting at $1,299, and these were the specs that I talked about. Now, you could also upgrade the M2 Pro chip with that 12-core CPU and 19-core GPU for $300, but I personally wouldn't suggest that because you just don't see a big enough improvement, and that $300 could be better served upgrading your memory. Now, that base version is the one that I tested out, and I did use it with some external storage. That allowed me to save $336 doing it this way. I also get to keep that 512 gigs of storage for OS and apps. Now, if you still have more room in the budget and you want to maximize performance for now and in the future, get the 32 gig memory upgrade. Remember, you can't upgrade the memory after the purchase, but you can always get more storage that's the same speed that your internal drive would have been. I know you may not like external boxes because of that damn cord is short and it ends up sitting on top of your Mac or next to it. Just get a longer Thunderbolt 4 cable like I did. This allows you to get the best experience and it doesn't cost you a ton more money. If the Mac Studio wasn't a thing, the best M2 Pro Mac Mini I would build, knowing what I know now, is the base 10-core CPU chip is a good start. Max out the memory at 32 gigs for an extra $400, putting me at $1,699. Knowing what I know now about external drives, I would not spend $1,200 for 4 terabytes of storage. I would, however, spend $200 to upgrade the storage to 1 terabyte. The number of applications I now have installed on this machine is 26 gigs. Now, things like the OS isn't a super big file on the machine, but if you plan to upgrade anytime in the future, it does require at least 16 gigs of space to install it on the machine. Not something you should worry about, but most people max out their phones all the time, so I wanted to go on record. Now, what I have on the machine isn't really that much at all. 512 gigs should be fine, but I am thinking about the future at this point. Before I give you the total, I do want to mention the Ethernet port. I have my machine hooked up to the Ethernet for internet. I also have a NAS to store all of my videos on. I would add the 10 gigabit Ethernet so I can access this via hardwire. It is another $100 for me, but you might not need it. So, my total is now $19.99, and if you don't do the Ethernet, $18.99. Sheesh. Adds up quick, doesn't it? Now you might be thinking to yourself, this guy knows what he's talking about. He seemed to have done all the research and listened to all the advice. Well, you're super smart then. In all seriousness, let me give you some food for thought. A couple minutes ago, I mentioned if the Mac Studio wasn't available, this is what I would get. Well, it is available. And the $1,999 that I'm about to spend is the starting price of a Mac Studio M1 Max. 10-core CPU, 24-core GPU, 32 gigs of memory to start. 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, okay. 2 USB-A ports, okay. HDMI port, 10 gig Ethernet, and on the front, an SD card reader, and 2 more USB-C ports, not Thunderbolt 4. Now, some of you might be thinking, why don't I just wait for the update for the M2 for the Mac Studio? Well, there's been a number of stories from a few months ago till now that range from it's going to get updated in 2023, it's never going to come back, it's not going to be updated, and to what I think it might be, it's going to be updated in a couple years, potentially with an M3. I think right now Apple's focus is on the Mac Pro. If you're willing to spend that much on a Mac Mini, you owe it to yourself and your sanity when working on something heavy to at least explore this option. Would you guys want to hear about my experience using the Mac Studio for the past 6 months? Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. If you want to check out my other videos I did on the Mac Minis, or what Apple might be planning for this year, go ahead and check out these videos right here. Of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you won't miss my next video. You have a great day. See ya.